The mountain man had gold enough to buy the finest horse in 3 territories, a legendary Appaloosa that could outrun the wind itself. But when he reached into his leather pouch that autumn day in 1858, he didn't hand those coins to the horse trader. He gave them to a monster. At least that's what the crowd whispered when they saw the girl, heavy-set, trembling, worthless. They laughed when he bought her contract instead. They stopped laughing when they realized what he'd actually purchased. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust never really settled at Fort Bridger. It hung in the air like a living thing, golden and thick in the slanted autumn light, swirling around the boots of men who'd traveled 1,000 miles to stand in that god-forsaken trading post where the Wyoming wind met the Utah territory line. 1858 was a year of motion wagon trains heading west, trappers heading into the high country before the first snow, and men like Silas Boone making fortunes off the desperation of both. Silas stood in the center of the stockade yard, one hand resting on the neck of the most beautiful horse anyone present had ever seen. The Appaloosa stallion gleamed like a coin fresh from the mint-white coat, scattered with spots dark as midnight muscles rippling beneath skin so fine you could trace the veins. The horse stood 16 hands high, with eyes that held intelligence and fire in equal measure. "Gentlemen," Silas announced, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man who'd sold everything from rifles to salvation. "What you're looking at is legend-made flesh. This here stallion was bred from Chief Joseph's own stock, stolen by Blackfeet raiders, won in a knife fight by a man now dead, and trained by the finest horsemen in the Shoshone Nation. Before I acquired him legally, I might add, just 3 weeks past." A crowd had gathered. There were always crowds when Silas brought out the good horses. Grizzled trappers leaned on their rifles, traders calculated profit margins in their heads, and a few wide-eyed boys dreamed dreams they'd never afford. But Silas wasn't playing to the crowd. His eyes kept drifting to the edge of the gathering where a single figure stood apart from the others. Jonas Wren. Even standing still, the mountain man looked like he was carved from the granite peaks he called home. Tall and lean, weathered by altitude and isolation, with a beard gone silver at the edges and eyes the color of a January sky. He wore buckskin darkened by weather and use, and carried a Hawken rifle like it was an extension of his own arm. Most men at Fort Bridger were running toward something Goldland fresh starts. Jonas Wren looked like a man who'd found what he was looking for years ago, and had come down from the high country only because winter demanded it. "Jonas!" Silas called out, gesturing with theatrical warmth. "Come closer, friend. This is a horse that deserves a rider worthy of him." Jonas moved through the crowd with that peculiar economy of motion that marked true wilderness men, no wasted energy, every step deliberate. When he reached the horse, he didn't reach out to touch it. He just looked, studied. The stallion's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as it scented this new human. "He's everything I said and more," Silas continued, warming to his pitch. "Fast as thought, strong as faith, smart enough to keep you alive in country that wants you dead. I've had offers, substantial offers, but I've been holding him, waiting for the right buyer." He paused for effect. "Waiting for you, Jonas." "Didn't know you were in the business of waiting," Jonas said quietly. His voice had a rasp to it, like wind through canyon stone. "For the right price, I wait. For the wrong buyer, I walk away." Silas patted the horse's neck. "This animal deserves mountains, not some freight company harness. Deserves a man who understands what loyalty means." It was good salesmanship appeal to the buyer's ego, make it about more than money. Silas had used this approach 100 times. It worked because it was partly true. He did want this horse to have a good home, but he wanted the gold more. "How much?" Jonas asked. $70, gold not paper." A murmur ran through the crowd. $70 was 6 months' wages for a working man. It was a down payment on a homestead. It was quite simply a fortune for a horse, even a horse like this. Jonas nodded slowly. Fair price for an unfair animal. Silas felt victory warm his chest. The mountain man had gold, everyone knew it. Trapping season had been good, and Jonas Wren was legendary for his ability to read streams and set trap lines where beaver were thickest. More than that, Jonas had been working the high country for near 20 years, and every autumn he came down with leather pouches that clinked with the weight of profit. "So we have a deal." Silas extended his hand. Jonas looked at the hand but didn't take it. His eyes had drifted past Silas toward the fort gates where something had caught his attention. The crowd turned to follow his gaze. A wagon was coming through the gates, a tired freight wagon with canvas sides and wheels that squeaked loud enough to wake the dead. The driver was a thick-necked man with a face like curdled milk, all sour lines and permanent meanness. Next to him sat a woman. No, a girl. Barely 20 if she was a day. She was heavy-set. That much was obvious even from a distance. Her dress was a faded brown that might have been any color years ago, and her hair hung in limp strands around a face turned downward, studying her own hands in her lap. Even across the yard, Silas could see the bruises on her arms where the sleeves pulled back. Fresh ones, purple-black, old ones yellowed and fading. The wagon creaked to a stop near the trading post entrance. The driver climbed down with the graceless thump of a man who viewed physical effort as an insult. He spat tobacco juice in a brown arc and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Got business here," he called out to no one in particular. "Any of you gentlemen in the market for a house servant?" The girl flinched at the words but didn't look up. Silas felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen this before, indentured contracts sold and traded like livestock. It was legal technically, though. The legality depended heavily on which territory you stood in and who was asking questions. Wyoming Territory in 1858 was light on questions and heavy on looking the other way. "She's got 4 years left on her contract." The driver continued, warming to his pitch now that he had attention. "Bought her in St. Louis off a widow who couldn't afford to keep her. Good worker when she applies herself. Knows cooking, cleaning, mending. Strong back for heavy work." "Fat as a Christmas goose, though," someone in the crowd called out. Laughter rippled through the gathering, not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The casual cruelty of men who'd learned to measure everything by its utility. The girl's shoulders hunched inward as if she could fold herself small enough to disappear. The driver grinned, showing brown teeth. "Well, now that's precisely why I'm willing to negotiate on price. She eats more than she's worth, I'll admit that plain, but she's got skills and she's biddable. Hasn't run off once, and Lord knows she's had opportunity." "What's the asking price?" This from a trader Silas knew, slightly a man who ran a freight office and was always looking for cheap labor. $20 takes the contract. That's 4 years of work for less than what you'd pay for a decent mule. More laughter. The girl was looking at her hands like she could will herself to vanish into them. Silas found himself looking back at Jonas. The mountain man's face had gone absolutely still. Not angry, not shocked, just still in a way that made the hair prickle on Silas's neck. It was the stillness of a hunter who'd just spotted prey, or a predator who'd just been insulted. Jonas walked away from the horse, walked straight toward the wagon with that same economical stride, and the crowd parted for him, instinctively sensing something in his movement that wasn't to be questioned. "You're selling her contract?" Jonas asked the driver. His voice was quiet, conversational almost. "That's right," the driver said, sizing Jonas up, and apparently liking what he saw a man with money standing tall. "You in the market. I'll tell you straight, she's no beauty, but she'll work herself to bone if you keep after her. Just needs a firm hand." "Show me the papers." The driver blinked, surprised by the directness, but he reached into the wagon and pulled out a folded document, yellowed and stained. Jonas took it and read slowly, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the legal language. Silas had seen enough contracts to know what it would say: standard indenture binding the girl to service in exchange for passage and keep transferable to any buyer willing to assume the terms. "This is legal?" Jonas asked. "Legal as Sunday," the driver assured him. "Drawn up by a proper lawyer in St. Louis. That widow who sold her to me had it done right and official." Jonas folded the papers and looked at the girl for the first time. She still wouldn't raise her eyes. Silas could see her hands trembling in her lap. "What's your name, miss?" Jonas asked. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. "Speak up when you're spoken to," the driver snapped and raised his hand, not striking her, but the threat implicit in the motion. The girl flinched violently. Jonas's hand moved so fast Silas almost missed it. One moment, the driver's arm was raised, the next Jonas had caught the man's wrist and held it locked in place, his grip making the driver's face go white. Don't Jonas said simply. He released the wrist and stepped back. The driver stumbled, rubbing feeling back into his hand, and for a moment looked like he might say something stupid. Then he looked at Jonas's eyes and thought better of it. Jonas turned back to the girl, his voice gentled. "What's your name, Mabel," she whispered. "Mabel Hart." "Mabel Hart," Jonas repeated as if testing the sound of it. "You understand what this contract means, what he's selling?" She nodded miserably. 4 more years of service, sir, to whoever buys it. And if no one buys it, then I go wherever he takes me. Her voice was barely audible. Until someone does buy it, or until the time's served. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. It was the same pouch Silas had been eyeing all afternoon, imagining how heavy it would feel in his own palm. Jonas hefted it once, then tossed it to the driver, who caught it with both hands, nearly dropping it from the unexpected weight. $70, Jonas said. Gold. Count it if you want. The driver's eyes went wide. He loosened the drawstring and peered inside, and Silas could see the glint of coins, double eagles, mostly the kind of gold that didn't lie, the kind of gold that had been meant for the Appaloosa stallion. 70, the driver started, then caught himself. The contract's only worth 20T. I know what it's worth. 70 buys the contract and your silence. You hand over those papers, you forget you ever owned them, and you ride out of here without another word about Mabel Hart. We got an understanding. The driver looked at the gold, then at Jonas, then back at the gold. Greed and confusion warred on his face, but greed was winning by a mile. We got an understanding, he said quickly, and thrust the papers at Jonas like they'd caught fire. Jonas took them carefully, checked they were the right documents, and then did something that made the entire crowd go silent. He tore them in half. The ripping sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. Jonas tore the papers again and again until they were just fragments of yellowed parchment fluttering in his hands like dying moths. He let the pieces fall and turned to Mabel Hart, who was staring at him with an expression caught somewhere between terror and disbelief. Miss Hart, Jonas said formally, your contract is void. You're a free woman. No one owns you. No one owns your labor. You understand what I'm saying? Mabel's mouth worked soundlessly. Tears started tracking down her round cheeks, cutting lines through dust and despair. Why? Because buying and selling people is an abomination, Jonas said simply. Even when it's legal, especially when it's legal. The crowd had gone so quiet Silas could hear the wind moving through the stockade walls. Men shifted uncomfortably. Some looked angry Jonas had just wasted $70 on principle, which struck them as foolish. Some looked thoughtful. A few looked ashamed, though they'd deny it if asked. The driver, sensing he'd gotten the better end of whatever strange transaction this was, climbed back into his wagon with unseemly haste. Pleasure doing business, he muttered, and snapped the reins. The wagon rolled away toward the gates, and no one moved to stop it. Jonas looked down at Mabel Hart, who had finally raised her eyes to meet his. She was crying openly now, her face blotchy and wet, and Silas realized she was beautiful in the way that suffering makes people beautiful, all the walls stripped away, nothing left but raw humanity. What do I do now? She asked, and it was the question of someone who'd never had to ask it before. Someone who'd been told where to go and what to do for so long that freedom felt like falling. Whatever you want, Jonas said. You're free to go anywhere. Do anything. He paused, then added carefully, though if you're willing to hear an offer, I've got one to make. Silas found himself leaning forward. The rest of the crowd did the same. Even the boys had stopped fidgeting. I live up in the Wind River country, Jonas said. High country, hard country, good country if you don't mind the work and the winter. I could use help someone to cook, keep things in order while I run trap lines. It's honest work for honest wages, $20 a month paid in gold on the first of each month. You'd have your own room, your own space. You could leave anytime you wanted. You'd be an employee, not a servant, not property. He looked at her steadily. I'm not offering charity, Miss Hart. I'm offering a job. You'd have to earn your keep, but you'd be earning it as a free woman making her own choices. $20 a month. Silas did the math automatically. That was more than most skilled craftsmen made. More than Jonas needed to pay for the kind of help he was describing. It was generosity wearing the mask of fair wages, and Jonas was too proud to call it anything else. Mabel stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. "You're serious? I don't joke about wages or winter. But I'm—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "You saw me. You heard what he said. I eat too much. I work too slow. You're free," Jonas interrupted gently. "Everything else we'll figure out as we go, but the question's simple. You want the job or not?" Mabel Hart looked around the stockade at the crowd of men watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt at the fort buildings weathered and worn, at the gates leading out to a territory so vast it could swallow a person whole. Then she looked back at Jonas Wren, at this strange mountain man who'd just spent horse money to tear up her contract and call her free. "Yes," she said. Her voice was stronger now, clear. "Yes, sir. I want the job." "Jonas," he corrected. "Just Jonas. Sir is for officers and fools, and I'm neither." For the first time since the wagon had rolled through the gates, Mabel Hart smiled. It was a small smile, tentative as a bird in winter, but it was real. Jonas nodded once, as if they'd just concluded the most natural business transaction in the world. Then he turned and walked back toward where Silas still stood with the Appaloosa stallion. The horse whickered softly, shaking its magnificent head. Silas found his voice. "Jonas, the horse. Still for sale." "Well, yes, but—" Silas gestured helplessly. "You just spent the money." "I did." Jonas looked at the stallion with something like regret. Beautiful animal. Would have been proud to own him. He reached out and stroked the horse's nose, and the stallion leaned into the touch. "But I reckon Miss Hart needed freedom more than I needed speed." "You could have bought them both," Silas heard himself say. "Could have negotiated that driver down to $10, maybe $15. Could have had the horse and the girl—" He caught himself. "The horse and Miss Hart's freedom. Could have had both." Jonas smiled a rare expression that cracked his weathered face like sun through storm clouds. "Could have," he agreed. "But then I'd have been the kind of man who haggles over human freedom to save money for a horse. And I'd rather be the kind of man who tears up contracts and walks away from beautiful things if that's what being decent costs." He tipped his hat to Silas, a gesture of respect that felt like absolution, and walked back to where Mabel stood waiting, looking lost and found at the same time. Silas watched them leave together, Jonas leading his pack mule and Mabel walking beside him, and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with profit or loss. The crowd was dispersing now, men drifting back to their business, and their whiskey already turning the scene into a story they'd tell later, the crazy mountain man who bought a fat girl instead of a prize stallion. They'd laugh about it over cards. They'd shake their heads at the waste. But Silas wasn't laughing. He stood there with his hand on the Appaloosa's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal's skin, and thought about what he'd just witnessed. He'd spent 30 years measuring the worth of things, horses and pelts tools, and land, everything reduced to the cold mathematics of profit and loss. He was good at it. He'd made a fortune at it. But Jonas Wren had just shown him a different kind of mathematics entirely. One where $70 bought something you couldn't ride or sell or trade. Where tearing up papers was worth more than keeping them. Where walking away from what you wanted proved you were the kind of man who deserved to want it. Silas looked at the torn contract pieces scattered in the dirt, already being blown away by the evening wind. Then he looked at the Appaloosa, at those intelligent eyes studying him like the horse knew exactly what had happened and was judging him for it. "Yeah," Silas muttered. "Silas. I know." The sun was setting now, painting the stockade walls gold and crimson. In a few hours, Jonas and Mabel would be miles away, heading toward high country and hard winter. In a few hours, Silas would lock his ledgers and count his money and feel the peculiar emptiness of a successful day that hadn't mattered at all. But right now, in this moment between what was and what would be, Silas Boone stood in the dusty yard of Fort Bridger with the most beautiful horse in 3 territories and felt for the first time in his mercantile life that he was holding the wrong thing. The wrong thing entirely. The trail north from Fort Bridger climbed steadily into country that seemed determined to scrape the sky clean. Jonas set a pace that was neither fast nor slow, the rhythm of a man who understood that mountains weren't conquered through speed, but through respect for distance. Mabel walked beside the mule, one hand occasionally touching its flank, as if to reassure herself that this was real, that she was actually leaving, actually free. For the first 3 hours, neither of them spoke much. Jonas would point out landmarks, a twisted pine that marked good water, a rockfall that meant bear country, a ridge where eagles nested, and Mabel would nod, storing each detail like precious cargo. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd learned that words could be weapons and were careful about when to draw them. The sun was westering hard when Jonas finally called a halt near a spring that bubbled up between gray stones. He unsaddled the mule with practiced efficiency, while Mabel stood uncertainly, clearly wanting to help, but not knowing how. "You know how to make camp?" Jonas asked, not looking up from loosening the cinch. "No, Sir Jonas. I've always worked indoors, kitchens and parlors and such." "Well, you're outdoors now." He gestured to a flat spot sheltered by a stand of aspen. "Ground needs to be clear of rocks and sticks, anything that'll poke through blankets come nighttime. Then we'll need firewood. Dead branches, only nothing green. Pile it close, but not too close to where we'll sleep. Can you do that?" Mabel looked at the ground, then at the trees, then back at Jonas. "I can try." "Trying's all I'm asking." She moved to the flat spot and began picking up stones, placing them carefully in a pile at the edge of the clearing. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and Jonas could see her checking over her shoulder every few minutes as if expecting criticism or a blow. He recognized the pattern. He'd seen it in horses that had been broken badly, always waiting for the next punishment. He busied himself with the mule and his gear, giving her space to work without feeling watched. By the time he'd unpacked what they'd need for the night, Mabel had cleared a respectable sleeping area and was gathering wood with surprising efficiency, sorting branches by size without being told. "You're learning quick," Jonas said as he arranged stones for a fire ring. Mabel flushed, pleased and embarrassed at once. "I've always been good at following patterns. Once I see how something's supposed to be done, I can remember it." "Memory's worth more than strength in the high country. Up where we're going, forgetting things can kill you." She went still. "Is it dangerous? Where we're headed?" Jonas considered how to answer that. He could lie, make it sound easy, or he could tell the truth and risk scaring her off. He chose truth. "It's dangerous if you're careless or stupid. Dangerous if you don't respect what the mountains can do. But if you pay attention and learn the rules, it's just hard work. Different kind of dangerous than what you've been living with." "What do you mean?" He struck flint to steel, nursing a spark into tinder. "People are more dangerous than mountains. Mountains don't lie. Don't pretend to care about you while they're using you up. Mountain kills you, at least it's honest about it." Mabel was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire catch and grow. "That man today, the one who had my contract, he told me I was lucky. Said most girls in my position would be on the streets or worse. Said I should be grateful he fed me at all." She looked at her hands. "I tried to be grateful, tried to believe him." "But you didn't." "I didn't know what else to believe." She met his eyes across the young fire. "Why did you do it?" "Really? It wasn't about needing help at your cabin. You could have hired anyone for less money. So why me?" Jonas fed a branch into the flames and watched it catch. He'd known this question was coming, had been turning possible answers over in his mind since they left the fort. Finally, he said, "I had a sister once, Margaret. Looked a bit like you, same kind eyes, same way of holding herself small, like the world was always about to step on her. She got married to a man who seemed decent enough on Sunday mornings. By the time we realized what he was really like, it was too late. He owned her legal and proper." He paused, remembering. "She died in winter of 1842. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But I knew better. He'd used her up same as that driver was using you up. Worn her down until there wasn't enough of her left to fight off a fever." "I'm sorry," Mabel whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be alive. That's the best revenge against men like that, staying alive and proving them wrong about what you're worth." He looked at her directly. "You asked why I did it. That's why. Because I couldn't save Margaret, but I could tear up your papers. Sometimes that's all we get, one chance to do right what we did wrong before." The fire crackled between them, and somewhere up the mountain a wolf howled, distant and lonely. Mabel shivered, but not from cold. "I won't let you down," she said. "I'll work hard. I'll learn everything you teach me. I promise." "I know you will. Now let's see about some food. You know how to cook over an open fire? No, but I can learn. Jonas smiled. That's the right answer to just about everything up here. They ate salt pork and beans warmed in a tin pot with hard bread softened in the bean juice. It wasn't fancy, but Mabel ate like it was a feast, and Jonas realized she probably hadn't had a meal without criticism or complaint in months. Maybe years. As darkness settled over the mountains like a wool blanket, Jonas showed her how to bank the fire for the night hot enough to keep predators away, low enough not to waste wood. He laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the clearing, far enough apart to be proper close enough to share the fire's warmth. Tomorrow we'll push harder, Jonas said as he settled into his blankets. Day after that, we start climbing real elevation. Gets colder the higher we go and the air gets thin. You'll feel it in your lungs, in your legs. Don't be ashamed if you need to rest. Even mountain goats know when to stop. Jonas. Mabel's voice came soft through the darkness. Yeah. Thank you. I know I already said it, but thank you for everything. Get some sleep, Miss Hart. Tomorrow comes early. But Jonas lay awake long after Mabel's breathing had evened into sleep, watching stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns and thinking about the choice he'd made. $70 was a fortune enough to buy that stallion, enough to stock his cabin with supplies that would last 2 winters, enough to make his life considerably easier. But he'd spent it on torn paper and a frightened woman's freedom, and he found he didn't regret it. Not even a little. What bothered him was how easily he could have walked away. How close he'd come to buying that horse and ignoring what was happening right in front of him. The thought sat in his stomach like bad meat. A coyote yipped somewhere downslope, and another answered from across the valley. Jonas checked the rifle lying next to his bedroll, more from habit than concern, and finally let himself drift towards sleep, wondering what kind of winter this was going to be with another soul sharing his mountain. They woke to frost and a sky the color of old pewter. Jonas had the fire rebuilt and coffee boiling before Mabel fully registered where she was, and he saw the moment of panic in her eyes when she woke somewhere unfamiliar, followed by relief when she remembered. He handed her a tin cup of coffee so strong it could strip paint. Drink it fast. We've got miles to cover. The second day was harder than the first. The trail climbed more steeply, switchbacking through pine forests, so thick the sun barely penetrated. Mabel struggled with the altitude, stopping frequently to catch her breath, and Jonas could see shame coloring her cheeks each time she had to rest. Altitude, he said simply during the 4th stop. Takes everyone that way. Your body's not used to thin air. Give it time. I'm slowing you down. We're not racing anyone. Mountains will still be there whether we arrive at noon or midnight. By afternoon, they'd climbed above the thick forest into country where the trees grew twisted and sparse, fighting for purchase in thin soil and hard wind. The view opened up like a door, swinging wide ridges and valleys, stretching to horizons that seemed impossibly distant snow, already claiming the highest peaks. Mabel stopped breathing hard and stared. It's beautiful, she said, and Jonas heard wonder in her voice. Pure wonder uncut by fear or calculation. It is, he agreed, and it'll kill you if you stop respecting it. How do I respect something this big? By being small, by knowing you're just passing through and leaving it no worse than you found it. He pointed to a distant peak, white against blue. See that mountain, the one that looks like a broken tooth? That's where we're headed. Base of that peak, there's a valley with a creek that runs year-round and meadows that stay green from snowmelt. That's home. How far? Day and a half if the weather holds. Longer if it doesn't. They made camp that night in a hollow, sheltered from wind, and Jonas taught Mabel how to read weather signs, the way clouds built against peaks, how animals moved before a storm, the particular smell of snow coming. She absorbed it all with fierce concentration, asking questions that showed she was actually thinking about what he said, rather than just memorizing words. You're smart, Jonas observed as they ate dinner. Real smart. Anyone ever tell you that? Mabel looked startled. No, the opposite mostly. I was slow at some things reading figures. They said I was simple. Different things come easy to different people. You might be slow with a book, but you're quick with patterns and memory. That's its own kind of smart. He poked the fire with a stick. Up here, book learning doesn't mean much. Knowing which berries are poison and which way water flows when snow melts, that's what matters. That's what keeps you alive. Will you teach me all of it? Every bit I know, which is considerable but not everything. Mountains always got more to teach than any one person can learn. That night, Mabel asked him about his life before the mountains, and Jonas found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, about his father's blacksmith shop, and the way iron sang when you heated it right. About Margaret, and how she'd taught him to read using the family Bible. About the restlessness that had driven him west in 1838 following rumors of beaver streams so thick you could walk across on their backs. I spent 2 years learning to trap from a Shoshone man named Laughing Fox. He saved my life more times than I could count, from whether from my own stupidity, from other trappers who saw green kids as easy marks. Jonas stared into the fire, remembering. He died in the winter of 1840. Fell through ice crossing a frozen river. I tried to get to him, but the current took him under before I could reach him. I kept his knife. He touched the blade at his belt. Every time I use it, I remember what he taught me. Respect the land, respect yourself, and don't respect men who've earned none. Is that why you don't go to the fort much? Part of it. Mostly I prefer mountains to people. Mountains don't lie or cheat or pretend to be something they're not. They're just mountains, honest in their indifference. But you're not indifferent, Mabel said quietly. You could have been. Yesterday you could have walked right past me and bought that horse and no one would have thought less of you. I would have thought less of me. That's enough. The third day dawned clear and cold, with frost thick enough to crunch underfoot. They broke camp quickly and pushed hard, Jonas setting a pace he knew Mabel could match. She was breathing easier now, her body adjusting to altitude, and she moved with more confidence on the uneven ground. Around midday they crested a ridge, and Jonas stopped gesturing for silence. Below them in a meadow rich with autumn grass, a herd of elk grazed cows and calves, mostly with one massive bull standing sentinel at the edge. His antlers were magnificent, 6 points on each side, and his coat gleamed copper in the thin sunlight. Mabel watched transfixed as the elk moved through the meadow, like shadows made flesh. The bull raised his head and bugled a sound that echoed off canyon walls, wild and ancient and impossibly beautiful. I've never seen anything like that, Mabel breathed. Most people haven't. Most people never will. Jonas shouldered his rifle. Come on, we're close now. They descended into timber again, following a creek that ran clear and cold over stones worn smooth by centuries of water. The trees here were massive old-growth pine and fir that had never known an axe, their trunks thick as wagon wheels. Moss-covered rocks, and the air smelled of pine resin and clean water. Then as they rounded a bend in the creek, Jonas stopped and pointed. There. The cabin sat in a small clearing where the creek widened into a pool. It was solidly built from local timber with a stone chimney and a roof that overhung deep to shed snow. A small barn stood adjacent, sized for a mule and maybe a milk cow. Behind the cabin, the mountain rose in steep slopes covered with forest, and above that the broken-tooth peak Jonas had pointed out yesterday. It was isolated, remote, beautiful in its simplicity. Home, Jonas said simply. Mabel stared at the cabin like she was looking at a cathedral. It's perfect. It's drafty, and the roof leaks in 2 places, and something's been trying to dig under the barn, but yeah, it suits me. He started forward again. Come on, let's get you settled before dark. The inside of the cabin was sparse but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder, and a small separate room that Jonas had used for storage. There was a table, 2 chair shelves stocked with supplies and hooks on the walls for tools and clothing. Everything had its place, and everything was in its place. You'll take the small room, Jonas said, already moving crates and traps out of the space. It's got a window and enough room for a bed and your things. I'll sleep in the loft like I always have. I don't want to push you out. You're not. That room's been wasted on storage. Better to use it proper. He paused in his work and looked at her seriously. Mabel, listen to me. You're not a servant here. You're not property. You're an employee, and employees get their own space. That's how this works. You understand? She nodded, eyes bright with something that might have been tears. I understand. They spent the rest of the day settling in. Jonas showed her the root cellar where supplies were stored, the smokehouse where meat hung, the chicken coop, currently empty but ready for spring. He explained the routine water from the creek, wood from the forest, maintenance on traps and tools, preparing for winter. Snow will come in about 3 weeks, he said as they stood outside watching the sun set behind the peak. When it does, we'll be locked in until spring. Maybe see another human once or twice if we're lucky, but mostly it'll be just us and the mountain. You need to know that before you commit to staying. Winter up here is long, dark, and lonely. If you can't handle that, better to know now. Mabel looked at the cabin, at the creek running silver in the dusk, at the mountains rising all around like walls against the world. Then she looked at Jonas. "I've been lonely in crowded rooms," she said quietly. "Been locked in places with no bars on the windows. This," she gestured at the wilderness around them, "this doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is going back to what I was before." "Then you'll stay." "I'll stay. For as long as you'll have me." Jonas nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now let's get dinner started. Tomorrow, real work begins." That first week passed in a blur of learning. Jonas taught Mabel how to chop wood properly, where to aim, how to read the grain, when to use wedges. He showed her how to maintain the fire so it burned hot and clean, how to cook over coals instead of flame, how to make bread that would stay good for days. She learned to recognize animal tracks in the mud near the creek, deer, elk, bear, mountain lion, and what each set of prints meant in terms of danger or opportunity. She was clumsy at first, as anyone would be learning entirely new skills. She cut herself with the axe not badly, but enough to bleed. She burned bread and undercooked beans, and once left the chicken coop door unlatched, necessitating a frantic chase to recover the 3 hens Jonas had bought from a neighbor down valley. But she never complained, never made excuses. When she failed, she asked how to do it better, then tried again. Jonas found himself impressed by her determination, by the way she approached each new challenge like it was a problem to be solved rather than a burden to be endured. "You're doing good," he told her one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Real good. Better than I expected." Mabel smiled, and Jonas realized she smiled more easily now, the expression coming natural instead of forced. "I like it here. I like the work. I like knowing that when I do something well, it's for us, not for someone who'll just criticize anyway." "Us," Jonas repeated. "I like the sound of that." The routine they settled into felt comfortable, like a worn boot that molds to your foot. Jonas would wake before dawn and get the fire going while Mabel slept. She'd rise shortly after, make coffee and breakfast, and they'd eat together while planning the day's work. Then Jonas would head out to check trap lines or hunt, while Mabel tackled chores around the cabin, mending, cleaning, preparing food for winter storage. Evenings, they'd work together on larger projects, splitting wood, repairing tools, reinforcing the barn against winter wind. And they talked. Jonas found himself telling stories he hadn't thought about in years, tales of early trapping days, of close calls with weather and wildlife, of the strange characters who populated mountain country. Mabel shared less about her past, but occasionally she'd let slip some detail. A mother who'd died when she was 8, a father who'd sold her indenture to pay debts, years of being passed from household to household like unwanted furniture. "I used to dream about running away," she confessed one night, as they sat by the fire, Jonas oiling traps while Mabel mended one of his shirts. "But I never knew where I'd run to. Didn't seem like freedom if you were just running scared. And now I'm not running. I'm here. That's different." She bit off thread and examined her work. "Jonas, what happens when spring comes?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, will you still want me here, or was this just a winter thing?" Jonas set down the trap he'd been working on and looked at her directly. "Mabel, I told you $20 a month. I meant it. Long as you want to stay and work, you've got a place here. Winter, spring, summer doesn't matter. This is a standing offer, not a temporary arrangement." "But what if you get married? Bring a wife up here." "She's not going to want me around," Jonas laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound. "I'm 53 years old, and I live on top of a mountain. Any woman willing to marry me at this point would have to be as crazy as I am, and if she's that crazy, she probably won't mind you being here." He softened his tone. "Besides, I'm not the marrying kind. Mountain claimed me long ago. You don't need to worry about being pushed out. Mabel nodded but didn't look convinced. Jonas understood she'd spent too many years being temporary, being disposable. Trust would take time. October turned to November and the first serious snow came on a Wednesday afternoon. They saw it building all morning, clouds massing against the peak, that particular pressure in the air that promised precipitation. By noon, flakes were falling thick and fast, covering the meadow in white. Jonas took Mabel outside and stood with her in the swirling snow, letting it collect in their hair and on their shoulders. "This is what you signed up for," he said. 5 months of this, maybe 6. Snow deep enough to drown in. Temperatures cold enough to freeze spit before it hits ground. Darkness that comes at 4 in the afternoon and doesn't leave until 8 the next morning. "You sure you want this?" Mabel tilted her face up to the sky, eyes closed, letting snow kiss her cheeks. When she opened her eyes, they were shining. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. They spent the next week snowbound the storm, dumping 3 feet of powder that transformed the landscape into something from a fairy tale. Jonas taught Mabel how to move in deep snow, how to read avalanche danger, how to preserve body heat when the temperature dropped below 0. She learned to snowshoe, falling frequently at first, but eventually getting the hang of the strange rolling gait. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between them. Jonas started noticing small things, the way Mabel hummed while she cooked, how she'd organized the supplies more efficiently than he'd managed in years, the sound of her laughter when he told a particularly bad joke. She stopped flinching when he moved suddenly, stopped apologizing for every small mistake, started offering opinions instead of just agreeing with whatever he said. She was becoming herself, the real Mabel, not the beaten-down servant who'd arrived on that wagon. One evening in late November, Jonas came in from checking traps to find Mabel standing at the window staring out at the moonlit snow. She didn't hear him enter and he paused in the doorway, arrested by something in her posture. She looked peaceful, content, like someone who'd finally found where they belonged. "Mabel," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, smiling. "I was just thinking, I've been here almost 2 months now. Feels like longer. In a good way." "Getting cabin fever yet?" "Not even a little." She moved to help him with his coat, brushing snow from the shoulders. "I think this might be the first place I've ever lived that felt like home." Jonas hung his coat and hat, then went to warm himself by the fire. "That's good. A person needs a home, even mountain hermits like me." "Jonas," Mabel's voice was hesitant, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it?" "Buying my contract instead of that horse." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. Finally he said, "Not once, not even for a second. That horse would have been a tool, a beautiful tool, but still just a tool. You're—" He paused, searching for words. "You're a person, a good person. Having you here, seeing you come alive again, watching you learn and grow and smile, that's worth more than any horse ever born." He looked at her seriously. "I spent $70 and got back something I didn't know I was missing. Got back the feeling that I'm living for something besides just surviving. That's a bargain at twice the price." Mabel's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just be here. Be happy. That's enough." They stood there in the firelight, snow falling silent outside, and Jonas realized that he'd been wrong about something fundamental. He'd thought he'd saved Mabel that day at Fort Bridger. But looking at her now, strong, capable, content, he understood that maybe she'd saved him too. Saved him from the slow calcification of a man living alone too long. Saved him from forgetting what it felt like to care about someone else's happiness. Outside, the wind picked up howling around the cabin walls. But inside, the fire burned warm and steady, and 2 people who'd both been lost had somehow found each other in the vastness of the mountains. It wasn't salvation. It wasn't romance. It was something quieter and more durable. It was human connection in a place that tried to strip such things away. It was proof that kindness could survive at altitude, that dignity didn't require witnesses, and that sometimes the best trades were the ones that looked like losses on paper but felt like victory in your chest. December arrived with temperatures that plunged below 0 and stayed there for days at a time. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and light, and the sound of 2 voices sharing the long winter nights with stories and laughter and the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. And in Fort Bridger, far below, and impossibly distant, Silas Boone still had the Appaloosa stallion. He'd feed it, brush it, show it to potential buyers. But sometimes on cold nights when the wind rattled his windows, he'd think about Jonas Wren and the girl whose freedom cost $70, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was the one who'd made the bad trade after all. Winter deepened like a held breath, and the cabin became its own small world suspended between earth and sky. By mid-December, the snow had piled so high against the north wall that Jonas had to shovel a path just to reach the woodpile. The creek froze solid except for one stubborn section where the current ran too fast to ice over, and that open water became their lifeline, a place to fill buckets without having to melt snow for every cooking need and wash. Mabel had taken to the isolation better than Jonas had dared hope. Some people cracked under the weight of winter silence, driven half mad by the endless white, and the way sound died in deep snow. But Mabel seemed to expand into the quietness, filling it with humming, and the small, industrious sounds of work well done. She'd reorganized the entire cabin, creating systems Jonas hadn't known he needed. Herbs hung to dry in the warmest corner tools arranged by frequency of use, supplies labeled and inventoried so they'd know what to restock come spring. "You're making me look bad," Jonas said one morning as he watched her rotate their meat stores, checking each piece for spoilage. 20 years I've been up here doing things halfway, and you show up and prove there was a better way all along." Mabel laughed, and Jonas had learned to love that sound, genuine and unguarded. "You kept yourself alive for 20 years. I'd say that's doing better than halfway." Alive and living well are two different things. He poured himself more coffee from the pot she kept perpetually warm on the stove. "You've taught me the difference." She turned to look at him, a strip of dried venison in her hand. "Jonas Wren. Are you going soft on me?" "Maybe. Mountain living'll do that makes you appreciate comfort when you find it." They'd fallen into an easy partnership that felt older than the mere 3 months they'd known each other. Jonas would wake to find Mabel already stoking the fire, and she'd wake to find him returning from early trap lines with fresh game or firewood. They cooked together, ate together, worked together with the seamless coordination of people who'd learned to read each other's rhythms. But it wasn't all domestic peace. The mountains had their own ideas about comfort, and they expressed those ideas with brutal clarity. The trouble started on a gray afternoon in early January when Jonas was checking the trap line that ran along the eastern ridge. He'd left Mabel at the cabin with a list of chores and a promise to return before dark. The traps had been productive, 3 marten and a fox. Good pelts that would fetch decent prices come spring, and he was making his way back when he heard the sound that every mountain man feared. Horses. Multiple horses moving fast. Jonas dropped low, using a fallen log for cover, and watched as 4 riders emerged from the tree line below. Even at distance, he could read danger in the way they moved, scanning, searching hunters, tracking prey. They wore rough clothes and carried rifles in easy reach, and there was something about their posture that spoke of violence, held barely in check. One of them was the driver from Fort Bridger. Jonas recognized that thick neck and sour face even through the falling snow. His blood went cold. They'd come for Mabel. Had to be. No other reason for men like that to be this far into high country in dead winter. Jonas watched them pause at a fork in the trail, arguing about which direction to take. They were lost, he realized, following rumors and guesswork rather than clear knowledge. That bought time, but not much. He moved through the forest like smoke, using every bit of fieldcraft Laughing Fox had taught him. Speed mattered, but silence mattered more. If they heard him moving, they'd know someone was close. They'd know they were on the right track. It took him 40 minutes to reach the cabin, 40 minutes that felt like hours. He came in through the back, startling Mabel, who was kneading bread dough at the table. "Jonas, I didn't hear you." "We've got trouble." He was already moving, pulling rifles down from their pegs, checking loads and priming powder. 4 men, maybe 5 miles southeast. One of them's the driver who sold me your contract." Mabel's face went white. "They've come for me." "Looks that way." Jonas handed her the smaller rifle. "You remember what I taught you about loading?" "Yes, but Jonas, no buts. If they come here, they're not taking you. I don't care what legal paper they think they have. You understand me. You're free, and you stay free." I don't want you getting hurt because of me. Maybe I should... Should what? Go with them. Jonas's voice was sharp as a knife. Go back to being property. Mabel, look at me. He waited until her eyes met his. You remember what you said when I asked if you wanted to stay? You said this was the first place that felt like home. Well, this is your home, and nobody takes someone from their home. Not while I'm breathing. She nodded slowly, but her hands were shaking as she took the rifle. Jonas showed her where to stand behind a window with good sight lines where she'd have cover if shooting started. Then he positioned himself at the front door, his Hawken rifle loaded and ready. They waited. Silence pressed down like physical weight. The fire crackled. Snow hissed against the windows. Mabel's breathing came quick and shallow, and Jonas kept his voice low and calm as he talked her through it. Might be they don't find us. These mountains are big, and they're clearly lost. Could be they give up, head back down before the weather turns worse. You don't believe that? No, Jonas admitted, but it's possible. World's full of possibilities. An hour passed, then another. The light outside began to fail, shadows pooling in the clearing around the cabin. Jonas was starting to think maybe they'd gotten lucky. Maybe the riders had chosen wrong at that trail fork and were miles away by now when he heard it. The creak of leather, the soft blow of a horse stamping in cold. They were here. Mabel, Jonas whispered. Whatever happens, whatever you see or hear, you stay inside unless I call for you. You understand, Jonas. Promise me. I promise. Jonas checked his rifle one final time, then opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The four riders sat on their horses at the clearing's edge, backlit by dying daylight. The driver was in front, looking cold and mean and certain of himself. Well now, the driver called out. The hermit and his purchase. We've been looking for you. Found me, Jonas said flatly. Congratulations. Now you can turn around and leave. Afraid it's not that simple, the driver urged his horse forward a few steps. See, after you left Fort Bridger, I got to thinking about that contract I sold you, about how you tore it up without recording the sale proper, about how legally speaking that sale might not actually be valid. You took my gold. I did, and I spent it. But see these gentlemen here? He gestured to his companions. They're what you might call bounty hunters, specialize in recovering indentured servants who've absconded from their contracts. And according to the law, Miss Hart back there is still bound to service. She's not. Jonas kept his voice level, but his finger moved to rest alongside the trigger guard. I bought her contract and I freed her. That's the end of it. One of the other riders spoke up, a weasel-faced man with eyes that never stopped moving. Contracts can't be voided by the purchaser, only by completion of service or mutual consent of both parties. Since Miss Hart didn't consent to termination, since she wasn't even party to the transaction, the contract remains binding. That's the law. Whose law? United States law, territorial law. Take your pick. Jonas smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. See, that's where you're wrong. We're standing in the Wind River country, which the Shoshone might tell you is their land, and the United States might tell you is disputed territory, and I'd tell you is land that belongs to whoever's strong enough to hold it, and I'm holding it, which means my law applies here, and my law says Mabel Hart is free. The driver's face darkened. You can't just make up your own laws, old man. Watch me. The weasel-faced man tried again, his voice taking on a reasonable tone that didn't match his eyes. Look, we don't want trouble. We're just businessmen trying to recover valuable property. You hand over the girl, we'll even let you keep the money you paid. Call it compensation for your trouble. Everyone walks away happy. She's not property, Jonas said. Each word came out hard and separate. She's a human being with rights and dignity, and she's under my protection. You want her, you go through me. There's 4 of us and 1 of you, the driver pointed out, and that's a lot of confidence for a man standing alone. Who says I'm alone? On cue, Mabel appeared in the cabin window, the rifle barrel visible, pointed steady at the riders. Jonas had told her to stay inside, but she'd chosen to make her own decision, and he felt a surge of fierce pride at her courage. 5 against 4, Jonas corrected. And we've got cover while you're sitting on horses in an open clearing. and I've got 20 years of mountain living that taught me how to kill what I'm aiming at. So let's talk about math. First shot drops one of you, probably you." He gestured at the driver with the rifle barrel. "Since you're the one I most want to hurt. Second shot gets whoever's stupid enough to draw on Mabel. After that, it's chaos, and chaos in deep snow favors the people who know the ground. Even if you get us both, which I doubt, you'll lose at least 2 men doing it, and then the survivors will have to explain why they killed people over a dispute about a piece of paper that doesn't exist anymore." The clearing went very quiet. The horses shifted nervously, sensing tension. One of the bounty hunters, older than the others, with gray shot through his beard, spoke for the first time. "This is a bad play, Curtis." He was looking at the driver. "Man's got the high ground, got cover, and he's got the look of someone who'll do exactly what he says. Contract's not worth dying over." "There's 4 of us," the driver started. "And he only needs 2 bullets to make our lives hell," the gray-bearded man interrupted. "I've seen his kind before. Mountain men don't bluff. They just kill you and sleep fine afterward." He turned his horse. "I'm out. This job pays $10. I don't take $10 bullets for any reason." He rode away, and after a moment's hesitation, another rider followed. That left the driver and the weasel-faced man, and Jonas could see calculation warring with pride on both faces. "Your friends are smarter than you," Jonas observed. "Maybe you should follow their example." "You think you've won?" The driver's voice shook with rage. "You think this is over? We'll come back. We'll bring the law. We'll—" Jonas's rifle came up smooth and fast, and he fired. The bullet took the hat clean off the driver's head, sending it spinning into the snow 20 feet behind him. The horse bolted, and the driver had to fight to control it, his face gone white with shock. By the time he'd steadied the animal, Jonas had already reloaded, hands moving with the practiced speed of decades. "Next one goes through your skull," Jonas said calmly. "And before you think about drawing that pistol at your belt, remember that my partner there has a clear shot at your friend. You might get me, but you'll both be dead before you manage it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around, ride out of my valley, and never come back. You're going to forget Mabel Hart exists. You're going to tell anyone who asks that she died of fever on the trail. And if I ever see your face again, I will kill you where you stand. No warning, no conversation, just a bullet. We clear?" The driver touched his head where the hat had been feeling for damage that wasn't there. His hand came away trembling. "We're clear," he whispered. "Say it louder. I want to make sure your friend heard you." "We're clear." The driver's voice cracked. "We're leaving. We're not coming back." "Smart choice." Jonas lowered the rifle but kept it ready. "Now, get out of my mountains." They turned their horses and rode hard for the tree line. Jonas watched until they disappeared into the forest, then stood there for another 10 minutes, making sure they weren't circling back. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he lower the rifle and let out the breath he'd been holding. The cabin door opened and Mabel came out, still carrying her rifle, her face pale, but her hand steady. "You could have killed him," she said. "I could have. Didn't need to." Jonas checked the priming on his rifle, more from habit than necessity. Dead men cause questions. Scared men just cause stories, and stories fade faster than blood. They'll come back. Maybe not those men, but others. As long as there's money in it, they won't come back here. Too remote, too dangerous, too much work for too little profit. And by spring, there'll be new contracts to chase easier targets. He looked at her directly. "But if I'm wrong, if they do come back, we'll deal with it, same as we dealt with today. Together." Mabel was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the clearing where the riders had been. Snow was already filling in the hoofprints, erasing evidence of the confrontation. Finally, she said, "You would have died for me. Back there, if they'd drawn their guns, you would have—" "Yes," Jonas said simply. "Same as you would have shot to protect me. That's what people do when they care about each other. They stand. I never had anyone stand for me before. You do now." They went back inside, and Jonas built up the fire while Mabel set her rifle back in its place with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Neither of them spoke much as they prepared dinner beans and venison, same as always, but the silence between them had changed. It had weight now, substance. It was the silence of people who'd faced something dangerous together and come through intact. That night, as they sat by the fire after eating, Mabel said, "Tell me about Margaret. Your sister. Tell me everything." Jonas had been expecting this question, though he wasn't sure when it would come. He poured himself another cup of coffee and settled back in his chair, gathering memories like kindling. "She was 3 years younger than me, born in 1812, which made her 26 when she died. She had brown hair that curled at the ends no matter how hard she tried to straighten it, and she laughed like wind chimes, high and clear and musical. Father wanted her to marry well, make a good match that would bring the family up. Mother just wanted her to be happy. Margaret wanted to be a teacher. Did she get to teach for a while? There was a small school in our town, and she taught there for 2 years. She was good at it, patient with slow learners, firm with troublemakers, fair with everyone. The children loved her." Jonas stared into the fire, seeing the past in the flames. Then Thomas Whitmore came to town. He was a banker's son, well-dressed, well-spoken, knew exactly what to say to make people trust him. He courted Margaret proper flowers, church attendance promises of a good home. Father approved. Mother had reservations, but father overruled her. They married in spring of 1840. And then the mask came off. Turned out Thomas had debts his family was covering up. Turned out he drank more than was healthy. Turned out he thought a wife was something you owned like a horse or a watch. Jonas's jaw tightened. Margaret tried to leave once, came to me asking for help. I was young, stupid, believed in law and proper procedure. I told her she needed to go through official channels, talk to the minister, get the community involved. She tried. No one would help her. A wife's place was with her husband, they said. These things work themselves out, they said. What happened? She went back to him. What choice did she have? Divorced women were outcasts. Women who left their husbands had no prospects, no protection. So she went back and tried to make it work, and it broke her a little more each day. By winter of 1842, she was so worn down she couldn't fight off a simple fever. The doctor said, pneumonia. I said Thomas Whitmore. Same difference. I'm sorry, Mabel whispered. I'm sorry too. Sorry I didn't grab her and run when she came to me. Sorry I believed in systems that were designed to keep people trapped. Sorry I learned too late that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing are opposites. He looked at Mabel. That's why I tore up your contract, why I'd do it again tomorrow, because I failed Margaret, but I wasn't going to fail you. Mabel's eyes were bright with tears. I'm not Margaret. No, you're not. You're Mabel Hart, and you're stronger than you know. But you deserved the same chance she never got the chance to choose your own life, to be free. Jonas, Mabel's voice was soft but steady. Thank you for everything, for buying my contract, for bringing me here, for teaching me, for protecting me, for seeing me as a person when most people just saw a burden. You're not a burden. You never were. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire burning low, snow falling steady outside. The cabin felt smaller than usual in the best possible way, like a shelter against the world's cruelty, like proof that kindness could survive at altitude. The weeks after the confrontation passed in careful watchfulness. Jonas varied his trapline routes, always alert for signs of pursuit. But winter was deep now, truly deep, and the mountains had sealed themselves against intruders. Snow measured in feet rather than inches, temperatures that made steel brittle and leather crack. Only the most desperate or foolish would venture into high country during the heart of winter, and the bounty hunters had been neither desperate nor foolish enough. Gradually, Jonas and Mabel relaxed back into routine. But something had shifted between them. Mabel carried herself differently now, shoulders back, head high. She'd stood at a window with a rifle and proven to herself that she could face danger without flinching. That kind of knowledge changed a person. And Jonas found himself watching her with new eyes. The woman who moved through his cabin with easy confidence was nothing like the frightened girl from Fort Bridger. Mabel had shed that skin like a snake, sheds what no longer fits. In its place was someone competent, capable, and increasingly comfortable in her own strength. She'd also gotten better at the work. Her bread no longer burned. Her aim with a rifle had improved to the point where she could consistently hit targets at 50 yards. She could read weather signs almost as well as Jonas and knew which herbs treated which ailments. She'd learned to set snares for rabbits and could skin and clean small game without flinching. You're going to be the most competent mountain woman in 3 territories, Jonas observed one afternoon as he watched her efficiently process a rabbit she'd trapped. Give you another year up here and you'll be teaching me things. There's worse fates, Mabel said, working her knife with practiced movements. Being useful beats being decorative. You're both. She looked up startled. What? Jonas felt his neck heat up. He hadn't meant to say that out loud, but there was no taking it back now. I just mean you're skilled, but that doesn't mean you've got a good face. Kind eyes, pleasant to look at. He was making it worse and knew it. Never mind, forget I said anything. But Mabel was smiling a complicated expression that mixed pleasure with something that might have been sadness. You're the first person who's ever called me pleasant to look at. Most people don't look past. She gestured vaguely at her body. Past this. Then most people are fools. Maybe. Or maybe you're just kind. She went back to working the rabbit hide, but her smile lingered. Either way, I'll take the compliment. February came in with a blizzard that lasted 3 days and left drifts higher than the cabin's windows. They were buried and truly buried and spent those days in the warm cocoon of firelight and conversation. Jonas taught Mabel to play chess using pieces he'd carved from pine wood over lonely winters. She taught him songs her mother had sung, folk tunes and hymns that made the cabin feel less isolated. On the third night of the storm, when the wind was screaming so loud they had to raise their voices to be heard, Mabel asked, "Do you ever get lonely up here?" Jonas considered the question carefully. I used to think I didn't, thought I preferred solitude. Then you showed up and I realized I'd just gotten good at not noticing the loneliness. Like a man who goes deaf gradual doesn't realize how much he's missing until someone gives him back his hearing. So you were lonely. I was lonely and didn't know it. You showed me the difference between being alone and being lonely. First one's a choice, second one's a wound. Which is it now? Jonas looked at her across the table, where they sat playing chess, her queen advancing on his king, his defenses in disarray. Now I'm not lonely at all. Good, Mabel said, and captured his king with a knight he hadn't seen coming. Checkmate. March arrived with the first hints of thaw. The sun climbed higher in the sky, staying longer each day. Snow began to melt on south-facing slopes, revealing brown grass and mud and the promise of spring. The creek ice broke up with sounds like rifle shots, and water ran cold and clear and loud enough to drown out conversation. One morning, Jonas rode the mule down to the nearest neighbor, a trapper named Dutch Hansen, who lived 15 miles south in a valley that caught more sun. He returned that evening with news, trade goods, and an expression Mabel couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she asked as he unsaddled the mule. "Dutch says there's talk in the settlements. About us. About you." Mabel's stomach clenched. "What kind of talk?" "Some folks say I kidnapped you. Others say I bought a woman like livestock and have you locked up here against your will. There's even a story going around that you're actually my daughter and I'm hiding you from some scandal." He shook his head. "Amazing what people will invent when they don't know the truth." "What did you tell Dutch?" "Told him the truth, that you're a free woman working for wages, that you can leave anytime you want, and that anyone who says different is welcome to ride up here and ask you themselves." Jonas paused. "He also said there's been men asking about you. Not the bounty hunters, different men. Claims to be a lawyer representing someone who says they have legal claim to your contract." "But you tore it up." "I did, but they might have copies. Might have documentation that says the sale wasn't legal, same as that weasel-faced man tried to claim." Jonas looked at her seriously. "Mabel, come spring, we might have to deal with this proper. Might have to go into town, face whatever claims they're making, get it settled official. You understand what that means? It means leaving here, going back down where people can see me, judge me." Diomos. It means fighting for your freedom in a court instead of in a clearing. But yes, it means going back down. Temporarily. Mabel was quiet for a long time, staring at the mountains that had become her fortress. Finally, she said, "When spring comes, we'll go down together. We'll face whatever needs facing. But then we come back here. This is home now. I'm not giving it up without a fight." "Neither am I," Jonas said. "Neither am I." That night, lying in her small room listening to the creek running high with meltwater, Mabel realized something that should have frightened her but didn't. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting for this place, for this life, for the man in the loft who'd given her back her humanity when the world had decided she had none worth saving. She was fighting for Jonas. And judging by the way he'd looked at her earlier, by the way his voice softened when he said her name, by the 1,000 small kindnesses he showed her every day, Jonas was fighting for her too. The mountains had tested them with cold and isolation and armed men in the clearing. Now spring was coming, and the world below would test them with laws and lawyers and social conventions that said a mountain hermit and a freed servant woman had no business building a life together. But they'd faced worse and survived. They'd learned each other's rhythms and trusted each other's strength. They'd stood together when it mattered. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way side by side in the mountains that had witnessed their transformation from two broken people into something whole and worth protecting. The wind shifted outside, carrying the scent of wet earth and new growth. Spring was coming whether they were ready or not, bringing with it all the complications they'd avoided by hiding in winter's embrace. But for tonight, the cabin was warm, the fire steady, and two people who'd found unexpected grace in each other's company slept the sound sleep of those who know they're not alone. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight was theirs. Spring came to the Wind River country the way it always did, reluctantly fighting winter every inch of the way. Snow would melt for 3 days, then a late storm would dump another foot of powder. Creeks would run high and wild, then freeze solid overnight when temperatures plunged. It was a season of contradictions, of false promises and hard truths, and it lasted until mid-May when the mountains finally surrendered to warmth and green. Jonas and Mabel spent those volatile months preparing for what they both knew was coming. They couldn't hide in the high country forever. The rumors Dutch had mentioned were spreading, growing more elaborate with each retelling, and Jonas knew from experience that stories unchallenged became truth in people's minds. If they wanted to live their lives without constantly looking over their shoulders, they needed to face whatever legal claims existed and settle them permanently. But first they had work to do. The traplines had been productive through winter, and Jonas had more pelts than he'd collected in 5 years. Beaver marten fox, even 2 prime lynx that would fetch premium prices. He showed Mabel how to properly cure and bundle them, how to identify quality and sort by grade. She learned with her usual fierce concentration, asking questions that showed she understood not just the mechanics, but the economics. "These beaver pelts," she said one afternoon as they worked in the barn. "You said they're worth about $4 each. Good ones, yeah, maybe 5 if the buyer's honest. And you've got," she counted quickly, 37 of them. That's nearly $200 just in beaver, plus the other pelts. She looked at him with new understanding. "Jonas, you're not poor." He laughed. "Never said I was, just said I lived simple. There's a difference." Why live this way when you could afford better?" Jonas thought about how to answer that. He secured a bundle of pelts with twine before speaking. "Better according to who townfolk think. Better means more stuff, bigger houses, fancy clothes. But I've got clean air, clear water, and nobody telling me what to do. I've got mountains that go on forever and silence deep enough to hear yourself think. That's better by my measure. All the money does is buy me freedom to keep living this way. And now you're spending that money on legal fees to protect me. Best investment I'll ever make." He caught her expression. "Mabel, don't start that. Don't start thinking you're a burden on my finances. You've earned every penny I've paid you, and then some. This cabin's never been cleaner. My supplies never better organized, my meals never tastier. And beyond all that practical stuff," he paused, choosing words carefully, "you've given me something to care about besides just surviving. That's worth more than any pile of pelts." Mabel turned away, but not before he saw her eyes go bright. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not?" "It's true. Because it makes me feel things I'm not sure I should be feeling." The barn went very quiet, except for the sound of the mule shifting in its stall. Jonas set down the pelts he'd been holding and moved closer to where Mabel stood with her back to him. "Mabel, look at me." She turned slowly, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm crying. I'm happy here, happier than I've ever been. But sometimes it scares me how much I don't want to lose this. Don't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me. Or this place. Or this life we're building. I promise you that." You can't promise that. Those men, that lawyer, whatever claims they think they have, will lose, have to lose, because I'm not letting you go. Not to bounty hunters, not to lawyers, not to anyone. Jonas reached out and took her hands in his. They were rough from work now, calloused and strong. Nothing like the soft, frightened hands of the woman who'd arrived in autumn. Listen to me. When we go down to settle this, we go together. We stand together, and we come back here together. You hear me? I hear you. Good. Now dry your eyes and help me finish these bundles. We've got work to do if we're going to be ready for town. They spent the next week preparing for the journey down. Jonas cleaned and checked their rifles, made sure the mule was sound, and packed supplies for travel. Mabel baked hard bread that would keep for days, and sewed a new dress for herself, nothing fancy but respectable and clean. She'd gained weight over the winter, her face filling out with good food and no stress, and the dress fit her well, showing a figure that Jonas tried very hard not to notice, and failed completely. On the night before they were set to leave, Mabel asked him a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. When we get to town, what should I say I am, your housekeeper, your employee? What? Jonas had been dreading this question because he didn't have a good answer. The truth was complicated. What Mabel was to him had evolved beyond simple categories, but the world required labels, required explanations that fit into proper boxes. Say you're my partners, he said finally. Business partner, I mean. We work the trap lines together, manage the cabin together, which is true. People will talk. People already are talking, at least this way we control the story. He looked at her seriously. Unless you'd rather say something else? Rather call yourself something different? No, Mabel said quietly. Partner sounds right, sounds true. They left at first light, following the trail that would eventually lead them to a settlement called Sweetwater Station, larger than Fort Bridger, but still rough around the edges, with a proper courthouse and a judge who rode circuit through the territory. Dutch had sent word that Jonas should present himself there, that the lawyer with the supposed claim would be waiting. The journey took 3 days of steady travel through country that was coming alive with spring. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, purple, lupine yellow, balsam root, red Indian paintbrush. Elk grazed in valleys still patched with snow, and eagles soared overhead on thermals rising from sun-warmed rocks. Mabel rode the mule while Jonas walked, and they talked easily about everything and nothing about the land, about plans for next winter, about her growing skill with rifle and trap. What they didn't talk about was what would happen if the judge ruled against them. If some obscure legal technicality meant Mabel's contract was still valid. If Jonas's act of tearing up the papers had been symbolic, but not binding. They didn't talk about it because neither of them wanted to give voice to that fear. Sweetwater Station appeared on the third afternoon like a mirage made real, a cluster of buildings strung along a creek, with more buildings scattered up the hills behind. There was a general store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, a boarding house, and a square timbered building that served as courthouse, church, and community hall, depending on the day of the week. Jonas led them straight to the boarding house, a 2-story structure run by a widow named Mrs. Callahan, who had a reputation for cleanliness and discretion. She looked them over with sharp eyes that missed nothing, took Jonas's money and showed them to separate rooms, Jonas noted, which was both proper and disappointing. "Dinner's at 6, Mrs. Callahan said. "And the judge is hearing cases tomorrow starting at 9. I assume that's why you're here." "It is," Jonas confirmed. "We're looking for a lawyer named," he consulted the paper Dutch had given him, "named Thornton. Samuel Thornton. You know him. I know him." Mrs. Callahan's expression soured. "Slick as oil and twice as slippery. Stayed here last week, ran up a bill, and paid in promissory notes that probably aren't worth the paper they're written on. He's got an office above the Mercantile if you need to find him, but I'd recommend keeping one hand on your wallet when you do." "Sounds like a fine, upstanding citizen," Jonas muttered. "He's a lawyer," Mrs. Callahan said, as if that explained everything. "Will you be wanting dinner?" "We will, thank you." After she'd left, Jonas stood in the hallway between their rooms, feeling awkward in a way he hadn't felt in months. Up at the cabin, they'd fallen into comfortable closeness, not improper, but intimate in the way of people who share space and meals and daily life. Here in town, with walls between them and watchful eyes everywhere, that closeness felt exposed and vulnerable. "You all right?" Mabel asked from her doorway. Just not used to towns anymore. Too many people, too many rules. We'll get through this and go home. Just have to be patient. Patience isn't my strong suit. I've noticed. She smiled and it eased something tight in his chest. But you're good at other things, important things. We'll be fine. They went down to dinner at 6 and found themselves at a long table with other boarders. A mining engineer heading west, a young couple traveling to Oregon, and a salesman whose product changed with every story he told. The conversation was loud and superficial, and Jonas contributed as little as possible while Mabel fielded questions about where they'd come from and where they were going with a skill he hadn't known she possessed. We run trap lines in the Wind River country, she said easily. Mr. Wren's been working that territory for 20 years. I'm his business partner. The way she said it calm and confident, as if daring anyone to question the arrangement, made Jonas want to stand up and applaud. But he just nodded confirmation and went back to his stew, letting Mabel handle the social navigation while he tried not to feel like a bear in a parlor. After dinner, they walked the main street together as evening settled over the settlement. Lights glowed yellow in windows, and somewhere a fiddle was playing. It should have been pleasant, but Jonas felt exposed, conscious of every eye that turned their way, every whispered comment from doorways and porches. They're staring, Mabel said quietly. Let them stare. Not like they've never seen a mountain man before. They're staring at me, wondering what someone like you is doing with someone like me. Jonas stopped walking and turned to face her. Someone like you. You mean someone smart, capable, and courageous enough to build a new life from nothing? Yeah, I wonder that too. Wonder what someone like you is doing putting up with a stubborn old hermit. You're not old. I'm 53. That's not old. That's experienced. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Jonas, tomorrow when we face that lawyer, what if he has documents we can't fight? What if? Then we'll figure it out. We'll find another way. But Mabel, I need you to understand something. He took her hand right there on the main street of Sweetwater Station, not caring who saw. I didn't spend $70 in 6 months teaching you to be free just to watch someone take you away. If that judge rules against us, we'll appeal. We'll fight. And if the law won't protect you, then we'll go somewhere the law can't reach us. Canada, maybe? Or deeper into the mountains where no court's jurisdiction matters. I'm not losing you, not to paperwork, and not to men who think they can own people. You'd leave your cabin, your trap lines, everything you've built, in a heartbeat, because I built that life for myself, but I'd build a new one with you if that's what it takes. He squeezed her hand. You're not alone in this. You understand whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together. Mabel's eyes were bright again, but she was smiling through the tears. How did I get so lucky? Finding you when I'd given up on luck entirely. Luck had nothing to do with it. That was choice. Mine and yours. We chose each other. He released her hand reluctantly. Now let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we go to war with paperwork. They parted at their respective doors, and Jonas lay awake for a long time in the unfamiliar bed, listening to town sounds through thin walls and thinking about how much was riding on tomorrow's hearing. He'd faced bears and blizzards and armed men without flinching, but the prospect of legal proceedings made his stomach churn. He understood mountains and weather. He understood survival and violence, but he didn't understand courts or lawyers or the arcane rules by which civilized society determined who owned whom. Morning came too fast and too bright. Jonas dressed in his cleanest shirt and ran fingers through his hair and beard, trying to look respectable. When he met Mabel in the hallway, he barely recognized her. She'd pinned her hair up properly, wore the new dress she'd made, and carried herself with a dignity that would have seemed impossible back at Fort Bridger. You look, Jonas started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Presentable, Mabel supplied. I'm trying for respectable and hoping to land somewhere near acceptable. You look beautiful, Jonas said, and watched her cheeks color. And respectable, and like someone no court in its right mind would treat as property. Let's hope the court agrees with you. They walked to the courthouse together, and Jonas felt every eye tracking their progress. News had spread, as it always did in small settlements, that the mountain man and his mysterious companion were here to face legal challenge. People gathered on porches and in doorways to watch them pass, and Jonas heard the whispers, saw the pointing fingers. Ignore them, he muttered to Mabel. I'm trying. The courthouse was already filling with spectators when they arrived. Apparently, legal proceedings were entertainment in settlements where entertainment was scarce. Jonas spotted Dutch Hansen near the back and nodded, greeting, grateful for at least one friendly face. Then he saw the lawyer. Samuel Thornton looked exactly like Jonas expected. Slick dark hair, expensive suit that was slightly too fine for the territory, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He stood at the front of the courtroom, studying papers and occasionally glancing toward the door as if waiting for someone. Jonas and Mabel took seats on the hard wooden benches and waited. Minutes crawled past. More people filed in, packing the space until the air grew close and warm. Finally, a door behind the judge's bench opened and an older man emerged wearing a black robe over rough frontier clothes, the circuit judge arriving from whatever case he'd heard yesterday in whatever settlement needed him then. "All rise," someone called, and everyone stood while the judge settled himself and surveyed the packed courtroom with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too much human stupidity and expected to see more today. "Be seated," the judge said. "We've got a full docket, so let's move through this efficient-like. First case is," he consulted his papers, claim of contract enforcement, brought by attorney Samuel Thornton on behalf of his client, against one Miss Mabel Hart, currently in the company of one Jonas Wren. "Are the parties present?" "We are, Your Honor," Thornton said smoothly. "Here, Your Honor," Jonas said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. The judge looked them over first, Thornton, then Jonas and Mabel, and Jonas saw something flicker in the man's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Then it was gone, replaced by judicial neutrality. "Mr. Thornton, present your case." Thornton moved to the center of the courtroom like an actor taking stage. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract law. Miss Mabel Hart entered into a legal indenture in St. Louis in the year 1854, binding her to service for a period of 7 years in exchange for passage, training, and keep. This contract was properly executed, properly witnessed, and properly recorded." He produced a document from his case and held it up. "I have here the original contract showing Miss Hart's mark and the signatures of 2 witnesses." "Let me see that," the judge said, and Thornton brought it forward. The judge read slowly, lips moving slightly, then looked up. "This appears legitimate. Where's the dispute?" "The dispute, Your Honor, is that Mr. Jonas Wren purchased this contract from the lawful holder, a Mr. Curtis Webb, and then destroyed it without properly recording the transfer and termination. Under territorial law, an indenture contract cannot be voided by the purchaser alone. It requires either completion of service or mutual agreement of both contracting parties. Since Miss Hart was not party to the transaction that voided her contract, the contract remains binding." "That's horseshit," Jonas said, and the courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Mr. Wren, you'll address the court with proper language, or you'll address it from jail. Are we clear?" "We're clear. Sorry, Your Honor, but that interpretation—" He caught himself before cursing again. "That interpretation is wrong. I bought the contract legal. I paid $70 in gold. Webb took the money and rode off happy. That's a completed transaction." "But did you record it?" Thornton asked smoothly. "Did you file the proper paperwork showing transfer of ownership? Did you then file a manumission document granting Miss Hart her freedom? Because without those legal steps, Your Honor, this was just a man buying a piece of paper and tearing it up. The underlying obligation remains." "Who's your client?" the judge asked. "Who's claiming injury here?" "I represent a consortium of creditors who have financial interest in ensuring contract law is properly enforced. If we allow people to simply tear up legal documents without consequence—" the judge interrupted. "Give me names." Thornton hesitated, and in that hesitation Jonas saw the weakness. "The specific names are confidential, but I assure the court—" "You assure the court nothing. This is my courtroom and I decide what's relevant. Either produce your actual client or withdraw the claim." "Your Honor, I must object." "Object all you want. I'm still waiting for names." Thornton's smooth facade cracked slightly. "One of the creditors is Curtis Webb himself, Your Honor, the man who originally sold the contract to Mr. Wren. He claims the transaction was conducted under duress, that Mr. Wren threatened him with violence, and therefore the sale was not legally binding." "Webb's a liar." Jonas said flatly. He took my gold because he was greedy, and now he wants more money. That's all. This is extortion dressed up in legal language. The judge looked at Jonas for a long moment, then at Mabel, then back at Thornton. Miss Hart, stand up. Mabel rose and Jonas saw her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Miss Hart, do you wish to be bound by this contract? Do you wish to return to service under its terms? No, Your Honor, I do not. Are you here of your own free will, or is Mr. Wren compelling you to say that, I'm here of my own free will? Mr. Wren has never compelled me to do anything. He freed me. He gave me employment at fair wages. He's treated me with respect and dignity. I choose to be here, Your Honor. I choose to work with him. Mr. Wren, stand up. Jonas stood. Do you claim ownership of Miss Hart under this contract or any other document? I do not. I claim she's a free woman with the same rights as any other citizen. The contract's void because I bought it and destroyed it. That was my right as purchaser. The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. The courtroom had gone silent, everyone leaning forward to hear what he'd say. Finally he spoke. Mr. Thornton, your legal argument has some merit. Contract law is complicated, and the question of whether destruction of a physical contract voids the underlying obligation is murky at best. However, he held up a hand as Thornton started to smile. This court also has to consider the practical implications of the ruling you're requesting. You're asking me to rule that Miss Hart, who clearly does not wish to be bound, should be compelled into service against her will. You're asking me to enforce a contract that one party wishes to void for the benefit of parties you won't even name based on claims of duress you can't substantiate. That strikes me as poor law and worse morality. Your Honor, with respect, morality isn't the question here. The question is whether I'm going to use the power of this court to help greedy men exploit a woman who's found her freedom, the judge interrupted. And the answer is no. I'm ruling that Mr. Wren's purchase and destruction of the contract constituted sufficient termination of obligation. Miss Hart is free. She owes nothing. This case is dismissed. The gavel fell, and the courtroom exploded in noise, some cheering, some protesting, everyone talking at once. Jonas felt Mabel grab his arm, felt her whole body shaking, and he turned to pull her into a hug right there in front of everyone. It's over, he said into her hair. You're free, really, truly free. Are you sure? Can he appeal? Can they, Let them try. Judge ruled in our favor. That's on record now. You're free, Mabel. Free. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and Jonas was peripherally aware of people congratulating them, of Dutch pumping his hand and Mrs. Callahan dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. But mostly he was aware of Mabel, the weight of her in his arms, the joy in her tears, the way she held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Thornton pushed past them, without a word, his face dark with anger. The judge was already moving on to the next case, treating their life-changing victory like just another item on a crowded docket. They stumbled out into the sunlight, and the world looked different, brighter, sharper, more real. People gathered around offering congratulations and asking questions, but Jonas just kept hold of Mabel's hand and led her away from the crowd, needing space to breathe. They ended up by the creek behind the courthouse, sitting on a fallen log and listening to water run over stones. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Mabel said, I can't believe it's over. It's over. You're free. I was free when you tore up the contract, but now it's official. Now nobody can question it. Now nobody can take you away. Jonas looked at their joined hands. Mabel, there's something I need to say, something I've been thinking about for a while now. What is it? Come spring, when we settle this, that's what I told myself. Get through winter, face the legal battle, then figure out what comes next. Well, it's spring. We faced the battle. And what comes next? He took a breath, gathering courage. What comes next is I want you to know that up at that cabin, you're not just my employee. You're not just my partner in business. You're my partner in life. And if you're willing, if you want, I'd like to make that official. Mabel had gone very still. Jonas, are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd consider marrying me, not because of obligation or gratitude, not because you need protection or I need a housekeeper, but because in the months we've spent together, you've become the most important person in my world. Because I'm happier with you than I've been in 20 years. Because when I think about the future, every version of it I want has you in it. I'm not, Mabel's voice broke. Jonas, I'm not what men want. I'm not beautiful or refined or you're exactly what this man wants. You're strong and smart and brave. You face mountains without flinching. You stood at a window with a rifle to protect our home. You learned to split wood and set traps and read weather signs. You make bread that doesn't taste like rocks and coffee that doesn't taste like mud. You laugh at my bad jokes and tell me when I'm being stubborn. You're everything I didn't know I needed. He turned to face her fully. I'm not a young man, Mabel. I'm set in my ways and hard to live with, and I prefer mountains to people. But if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. Mabel was crying again, but smiling through the tears. You really mean it? You really want to marry me? I really do. Then yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, Jonas Wren, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife and your partner and whatever else you need me to be. I'll spend my life with you in those mountains and never look back. Jonas kissed her. Then right there by the creek with the whole town probably watching and didn't care who saw or what they thought. He kissed the woman who'd been property 6 months ago and was now choosing him freely. The woman who'd arrived broken and had rebuilt herself into something fierce and beautiful. The woman who'd somehow impossibly agreed to spend her life with a stubborn hermit on a mountain. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Mabel said, "We should tell people, make it official. We should find that judge and see if he'll marry us before he moves on to the next town. Right now, today, why wait? We've wasted enough time on legal nonsense. Let's do something that actually matters." They found the judge an hour later at the saloon eating lunch and reviewing case files. He looked up as they approached, recognized them, and smiled. "Mr. Wren, Miss Hart, come to thank me for my ruling. Come to ask if you'd perform a wedding," Jonas said. "If you're so inclined." The judge set down his sandwich and studied them both. "You two getting married? That's fast work." "Been working up to it all winter," Jonas said. "Just took us a while to say it out loud. You got witnesses. Wedding needs witnesses." "We'll find some," Mabel said. And they did Dutch Hanson and Mrs. Callahan, who both agreed immediately and looked touched to be asked. They gathered in the courthouse an hour later, the same room where Mabel's freedom had been confirmed, and stood before the judge as he performed a simple ceremony with words worn smooth by repetition, but no less meaningful for their familiarity. "Do you, Jonas Wren, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Mabel Hart, take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, by the territory I pronounce you married. Mr. Wren, you may kiss your bride." Jonas did thoroughly and didn't care that Dutch was grinning or that Mrs. Callahan was crying again. He was married. At 53 years old, after 20 years alone on a mountain, he was married to a woman who understood him, who chose him freely, who'd build a life with him in the high country. They signed the certificate, Mabel's signature confident, now not the hesitant mark she'd made on that old contract. Jonas paid the judge and thanked him, and they walked out into the afternoon sun as husband and wife. "What now?" Mabel asked. "Now we go home," Jonas said. "Back to the mountains where we belong." They left Sweetwater Station the next morning, riding the mule together, now Mabel sitting in front while Jonas walked alongside. The town watched them go, and Jonas knew their story would grow. In the telling, the mountain man who bought a woman's freedom, the woman who became his wife, the winter they spent falling in love at altitude. Let them tell stories. Jonas had something better than stories. He had Mabel really and truly his now in the eyes of law and God. He had a cabin waiting in a valley where the creek ran cold and clear. He had mountains that would test them, and seasons that would challenge them, and a future that stretched out like the territory itself, vast and wild and full of possibility. As they climbed back toward the high country, leaving civilization behind, Mabel looked back one last time at the settlement disappearing below. "Any regrets?" Jonas asked. "Not one," she said, and smiled at him with such pure joy that Jonas felt something inside him that had been frozen for 20 years finally completely thaw. Not a single one. Let's go home. So they did. The journey back to the cabin took 4 days instead of 3 because they kept stopping to look at things. Wildflowers, Mabel wanted to identify a beaver dam. Jonas wanted to show her properly a meadow where they sat for an hour just watching clouds move across the sky. They were in no hurry. The legal battle was won, the marriage was official, and the mountains waited with the patient indifference of things that measure time in centuries rather than hours. On their last night before reaching home, they made camp in the same spot where Jonas had first taught Mabel to build a fire all those months ago. The aspen leaves were new and green now, trembling in the evening breeze, and the ground that had been frozen and hard was soft with spring growth. "You remember this place?" Jonas asked as he arranged stones for the fire ring. "I remember being terrified," Mabel said, gathering wood with the easy efficiency that was second nature now. "Terrified I'd do everything wrong. Terrified you'd regret bringing me. Terrified I'd wake up and it would all be a dream. And now I'm just grateful it was all real." She dumped an armload of branches next to the fire ring. "Though I still can't believe you married me. Mrs. Jonas Wren. It sounds made up." "Mabel Wren," Jonas corrected. "And it's real as this fire, this mountain, this moment right here." He struck flint to steal coaxing flame from tinder. "Besides, I'm the one who should be disbelieving. What did I do to deserve a woman who can shoot straight, cook decent, and doesn't mind that I talk to myself sometimes? You talk to yourself. You never noticed I have whole conversations when I'm working the trap lines. Laughing Fox used to say I was half spirit because I talked to things that weren't there." Mabel laughed, and the sound echoed off the canyon walls. "I talk to the chickens, have entire discussions about their egg-laying habits and personal drama. So I think we're evenly matched in strangeness." They ate dinner as the stars emerged, thousands of them, brilliant and close in the thin mountain air. Jonas had seen these stars for 20 years, but tonight they looked different. Brighter, maybe. Or maybe he was just seeing them through the lens of happiness, which changed everything. "Jonas," Mabel's voice was quiet in the darkness. "What happens now? I mean, we go back to the cabin. We keep living and working and building our life. But what about beyond that? What about 5 years from now, 10? What do you want to happen?" "I want—" She paused, gathering thoughts. "I want to build something that lasts, not just for us, but for others. You said once that you and Laughing Fox helped each other survive. I keep thinking about that, about how the mountains are hard, but they're easier when people help each other." Jonas waited, sensing she had more to say. "What if we opened our home to others? Not all the time, but when people need it. Travelers caught by early snow, trappers who get injured far from help. Maybe even—" She hesitated. "Maybe even people like I was. People running from something, needing a place to be safe while they figure out their next step." "You want to turn our cabin into a refuge?" "Not a permanent thing. Just a place where people know they can get help if they need it. Where nobody judges and nobody asks too many questions. Where freedom is respected." She looked at him anxiously. "Is that foolish? You came to the mountains to get away from people, and here I am suggesting we invite them in." Jonas was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire and thinking about Mabel's words. He had come to the mountains to escape, that was true. But what he'd escaped was society's cruelty and judgment, not human connection itself. And Mabel was right. The mountains were easier when people helped each other. Laughing Fox had taught him that. Dutch Hansen reinforced it. Even the confrontation with the bounty hunters had shown him the value of standing together. "It's not foolish," he said finally. "It's generous. And if that's what you want to build, a place where people can find safety and respect, then that's what we'll build. Together." Mabel's smile was radiant, even in firelight. "Together. I like that word." "So do I." Jonas shifted closer to her, and she leaned against his shoulder in a gesture that felt both new and ancient. "But we start small. We've got our own life to build first. Get through this summer, lay in supplies for next winter, maybe expand the cabin if we're feeling ambitious. Then we can think about opening our door to others." "Deal," Mabel said, and they shook on it like business partners sealing a contract. then laughed at the formality of the gesture between husband and wife. They reached the cabin the next afternoon, and Jonas felt something settle in his chest as the familiar clearing came into view. The creek was running high with snowmelt, the meadow was lush with new grass, and the cabin stood solid and welcoming exactly as they'd left it. He'd lived here for 20 years, but it had never truly been home until this moment, coming back to it with Mabel, knowing they'd build their future here together. Home, Mabel breathed, and Jonas heard everything he felt in that single word. They spent the next weeks falling into a new rhythm, not the rhythm of employer and employee, but of partners building a life. They expanded the garden, planting vegetables and herbs that would sustain them through the next winter. They reinforced the barn and built a proper chicken run with help from Dutch, who rode up one weekend with lumber and congratulations. They even started planning, in addition to the cabin, a room that could serve as guest quarters when they had visitors or storage when they didn't. "You're thinking ahead," Dutch observed one afternoon as they framed out the new room. "That's good. Shows you're settling in for the long term." "Been settled for 20 years, Jonas said, hammering a joint into place. "Just doing it right this time." "Marriage suits you, both of you." Dutch glanced toward the cabin where Mabel was working on something inside. "She's good people, Jonas. You chose well." "She chose me. I just got lucky she said yes. Luck's got nothing to do with it. You gave her freedom and respect. Most women would choose that over just about anything else." Dutch secured his end of the beam. "You hear any more from those bounty hunters, that lawyer?" "Not a word. Judge's ruling scared them off, I think. And even if they wanted to try again, word's probably spread that we're not easy marks." "Good. Though I'll keep my ear to the ground just in case. Some men don't know when to quit." But the months passed without incident. Summer came in full and glorious, painting the high country in colors Jonas had stopped noticing years ago, but saw again through Mabel's eyes: the impossible blue of alpine lakes, the purple of mountain peaks at sunset, the gold of aspen leaves catching light. They worked hard through the warm months, laying in supplies and firewood for the winter to come. And in the evenings, they'd sit on the porch Jonas had built, watching darkness settle over the valley, while Mabel told him about the book she was teaching herself to read, a Bible Dutch had given them as a wedding present. "I'm getting better at it," she said one evening, finger-tracing words slowly. "Still slow, but better." "You're doing fine. Reading's just pattern recognition in a different form. You're already good at patterns." "Will you teach me figures too? Proper arithmetic. If you teach me to make bread that doesn't require a chisel to cut." "Deal." So they taught each other, Jonas showing Mabel numbers and calculations, Mabel showing Jonas the patience and precision that turned flour and water into something that actually resembled bread. And slowly over the course of that summer, Jonas realized something profound. He'd thought marriage would be about companionship, about not being lonely. And it was those things. But it was also about growth, about becoming better versions of themselves because they had someone to grow, for someone to grow with. In August, their first real test came in the form of a young trapper who stumbled into their clearing half frozen, despite the summer heat, burning with fever and delirious with infection from a bear mauling that had gone bad. Jonas and Mabel spent 3 days nursing him back from the edge of death, using every bit of medical knowledge they possessed: willow bark for fever, yarrow and honey for infection, constant vigilance to make sure he didn't aspirate or fall out of bed in his delirium. When the young man, his name was Thomas, barely 20 years old, finally woke lucid, his first words were, "Where am I? Who are you?" "You're safe," Mabel said, pressing a cup of water to his lips. "You're at the Wren cabin. I'm Mabel. This is Jonas. You've been very sick." "I remember the bear. I thought I was dead." "You nearly were," Jonas said. "But you're young and stubborn. That counts for something." They kept Thomas another 2 weeks while he healed, and in that time, Jonas saw Mabel's vision made real. She cared for the young trapper with patience and skill, never making him feel like a burden, always treating him with the dignity she'd been denied for so many years. And Thomas, for his part, was properly grateful without being obsequious. "Why'd you help me?" he asked one evening as he sat on the porch regaining strength. "You don't know me. Could have been trouble." "Could have been," Jonas agreed. "But you were hurt and alone. That's reason enough. Most folks would have left me to die or charged me everything I owned for the help." We're not most folks, Mabel said simply. And the mountains are hard enough without people making them harder. When Thomas was well enough to travel, he tried to pay them. Jonas refused the money, but accepted some of the young man's furs enough to replace what they'd used, treating his wounds nothing more. You ever need help? Jonas told him, as Thomas prepared to leave. You know where to find us, and if you meet others in trouble up here, you send them this way. We can't save everyone, but we can help who we can. Thomas looked at them both, this unlikely couple who'd built something remarkable in isolation, and nodded. I'll spread the word. And thank you. For everything. You saved my life. You saved your own life by being strong enough to fight, Mabel corrected. We just helped a little. After Thomas left, Jonas turned to Mabel with a smile. So it begins. Your refuge for the lost and wounded. Our refuge, she corrected. I couldn't do this without you. You could. But I'm grateful you don't have to. As autumn returned, their second autumn together, though it felt like the first real one, Jonas and Mabel prepared for winter with the confidence of people who'd survived it once before. The addition to the cabin was finished, the stores were full, and they'd even acquired a milk cow from Dutch, which meant fresh dairy through the cold months. But the biggest change came in late September when Mabel took Jonas's hand one evening and placed it on her abdomen. There's something I need to tell you, she said quietly. Jonas felt his heart skip. What is it? Are you sick? I'm pregnant, Jonas. We're going to have a baby. The world seemed to stop. Jonas stared at her, at the small smile playing at her lips, at the joy and nervousness warring in her eyes. A baby. They were going to have a child. Are you sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor. All the signs are there. I'm about 2 months along, I think, which means the baby will come in spring. Jonas sat down heavily on the nearest chair, his mind racing. A baby. In this cabin in these mountains far from doctors and help. It was dangerous. It was terrifying. It was Jonas. Mabel's voice was uncertain now. Say something. Are you happy about this? He looked up at her and saw his own fear reflected back, but under the fear was something else, something that felt like hope and future and continuation all mixed together. Happy. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. Mabel, I'm terrified and thrilled and so full of feelings I don't have names for them all. A baby. Our baby. Growing inside you right now. You're not angry. Why would I be angry? Because it's dangerous, because we're so far from help, because nothing, Jonas interrupted. We'll make it work, we'll prepare. We'll get through it together, same as we've gotten through everything else. He pulled back to look at her face. But you need to promise me something. If at any point you want to go down to a settlement, be near a doctor, you tell me. No being brave, no pretending you're fine. You promise? I promise. But Jonas, I want to have the baby here, in our home, with you. Not in some strange town with people I don't know. Then that's what we'll do. But we prepare smart. We get books on childbirth. We talk to Dutch about finding a midwife who might be willing to come up in early spring. We learn everything we can. And they did. Over the following months, as Mabel's body changed and grew, Jonas became an expert in pregnancy and childbirth reading. Every book Dutch could find, asking questions of every woman who passed through, learning about complications and solutions and the 1,000 things that could go wrong and how to prevent them. Mabel took it all in stride with her usual practical courage. She continued working modified as needed and planned for the baby with the same efficiency she applied to everything else. They built a cradle from pine wood. They sewed blankets and small clothes. They talked about names and futures and what kind of world they wanted to raise a child in. A world where people are judged by their character, not their circumstances, Mabel said one snowy evening in December as they worked on baby clothes by firelight. A world where freedom isn't something you have to buy or fight for, where kindness is normal instead of remarkable. That's a tall order for 2 people in a mountain cabin. Every world starts small, starts with one person treating another person right, then that person passes it on. Maybe our child will be part of building that better world. She smoothed a hand over her swollen belly. Maybe that's the best thing we can do, raise someone who understands that dignity matters. that people matter. You're going to be an amazing mother, Jonas said softly. You're going to be an amazing father. I'm going to be a terrified father who makes 1,000 mistakes. Then you'll be a normal father. Mabel smiled at him. We'll figure it out together, same as we figure everything else out. Winter passed slowly, and Jonas watched Mabel with the vigilance of a hawk guarding its nest. But she remained strong and healthy, moving through the cabin with the careful grace of late pregnancy, still insisting on doing her share of the work despite Jonas's protests. I'm pregnant, not invalid, she'd say when he tried to take tasks from her. Let me be useful while I still can be. In February, Dutch arrived with a surprise, a midwife named Agnes, who ran a small practice in a settlement 2 valleys over. She was a round woman with iron-gray hair and hands that looked capable of miracles or murder depending on what the situation required. Dutch says you're having a baby in the high country, Agnes said, as she studied Mabel with professional interest. That's foolish, but I've seen worse. Let me examine you, make sure everything's progressing proper. The examination took an hour, and Jonas paced the porch outside like a caged animal until Agnes finally emerged. Well, he demanded. Well, she's healthy as a mountain goat, and the baby's positioned right. No reason to think there'll be complications, but birth is birth. Things can go sideways fast. Agnes fixed him with a stern look. I'll come back in April when her times close. I'll stay until the baby's born and she's recovered. But you need to understand this is dangerous. Women die in childbirth, even healthy women with everything going right. You need to be prepared for that possibility. I am, Jonas said, though the thought made him sick. But she's strong. She'll be fine. Strength matters, but so does luck. Make sure you've got both. Agnes accepted the generous payment Jonas offered and left with Dutch, promising to return in spring. The waiting was agony. Jonas had faced down bears and blizzards and armed men with less fear than he felt watching Mabel move through her pregnancy. But she remained calm, focused, preparing for the baby's arrival with the same methodical determination she brought to everything. April came with early warmth and the sound of ice breaking on the creek. Mabel was enormous now, moving slowly but still moving, still working, still planning. And then one morning, as Jonas was returning from checking snares, he heard her call from inside the cabin. Jonas, I think it's time. His blood turned to ice. Are you sure? The pain started an hour ago. They're getting closer together. It's time. Agnes wasn't due for another week. Jonas looked at the mountains surrounding them, at the miles of isolation between their cabin and help, and felt panic rise in his throat. But Mabel was looking at him with trust in her eyes, and he couldn't let her see his fear. All right, he said, forcing calm into his voice. Let's get you inside, get you comfortable. I know what to do. We've prepared for this. They had prepared. Jonas had read everything, talked to everyone, practiced on makeshift dolls, until Mabel laughed at his seriousness. But reading about childbirth and experiencing it were catastrophically different things. The labor went on for hours. Mabel was brave, braver than anyone had a right to be, but Jonas saw the pain in her face, heard it in the sounds she couldn't suppress. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, encouraged her the way the book said to encourage, and prayed to a God he wasn't sure existed that she would survive this. As evening darkened the windows, the pains intensified. Jonas, following the instructions he'd memorized, checked her progress and felt relief flood through him. You're close, very close. Next few contractions you push. Can you do that? I can do anything, Mabel gasped. Just tell me when. Now. Push now. She pushed with a strength Jonas hadn't known existed, her face red with effort, her hand crushing his until he thought bones would break. But he didn't care about his hand. He cared only about seeing this through, about bringing their child into the world safe. Again, he urged. I can see the head. One more good push. Mabel screamed a sound of pure effort that echoed off the cabin walls, and suddenly, Jonas was catching a tiny, bloody, perfect human being in his shaking hands. The baby gasped and cried, and Jonas had never heard a more beautiful sound. It's a girl, he said, his voice breaking. We have a daughter. He cleaned the baby quickly with hands that wouldn't stop trembling and wrapped her in the blankets they'd prepared. Then he placed the tiny bundle in Mabel's exhausted arms and watched his wife's face transform with a love so pure it hurt to witness. Hello, Mabel whispered to the baby. Hello, little one. We're your parents. We're going to love you so much. Jonas sat on the edge of the bed, looking at his wife and daughter, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. He thought he knew what mattered. He thought freedom and dignity and honest work were the things worth fighting for, and they were. But this tiny person who hadn't existed an hour ago, who depended on them completely, who represented hope and future and continuation, this was what everything else was in service of. "What should we name her?" Mabel asked. Jonas thought about the question, thought about his sister Margaret, who died because the world wasn't kind enough, thought about Mabel's courage and the life they'd built, thought about hope and fresh starts. "Grace," he said. "Let's call her Grace, because that's what she is, grace we didn't earn but received anyway." "Grace Wren," Mabel said, testing the sound. "I like it. Hello, Grace. Welcome home." Agnes arrived 2 days later and was surprised to find the baby already born and both mother and child healthy. She examined them both thoroughly, pronounced everything satisfactory, and looked at Jonas with new respect. "You did good work here. Most men would have panicked and made things worse. But you kept your head." "I had good motivation," Jonas said, looking at where Mabel lay with Grace sleeping in her arms. "That you did. That you did." The months after Grace's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Jonas, who'd thought he knew what exhaustion was, discovered he'd only been acquainted with exhaustion's distant cousin. Real exhaustion was being woken every 2 hours by a crying infant, was worrying constantly about whether she was eating enough, growing enough, breathing right in her sleep. But it was also holding his daughter against his chest and feeling her tiny hand grip his finger. It was watching Mabel nurse Grace with such tender attention that Jonas felt his heart might burst. It was seeing this small person discover the world, eyes tracking movement, hands reaching for things, eventually smiles that lit up the cabin better than any fire. By the time summer arrived, they'd found a rhythm. Grace was sleeping longer stretches. Mabel was back to her usual strength, and Jonas had learned to function on whatever sleep he could grab. They worked in shifts, one watching Grace, while the other handled chores, and somehow everything got done. And word continued to spread about the cabin in the high country, where people could find help without judgment. Over that summer and the following winter, they had a dozen travelers caught by weather, an injured prospector, a woman fleeing an abusive husband who stayed 2 weeks until she had enough strength and money to continue to California. Each person who came was helped, fed, respected, and sent on their way with supplies and directions to other safe places. "We're building something," Mabel said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Grace play in the grass she was walking, now stumbling around on unsteady legs with the fierce determination of toddlers everywhere. "Not just for Grace, but for everyone who comes through here. We're proving that people can be kind, that help without strings attached exists, that dignity isn't conditional." "Your refuge," Jonas said, "just like you wanted." "Our refuge. I couldn't do any of this without you." "You could. You're the strongest person I know, but I'm grateful you don't have to." Years passed. Grace grew from baby to toddler to young child, wild and confident and fearless, in the way of children raised in wilderness. She learned to track animals before she learned to read, could shoot a rifle at 8, and by 10 could navigate the mountain trails with the same confidence as her father. Other children followed a son they named Daniel, who had his mother's quick mind and his father's quiet strength, and another daughter, Margaret, named for the sister Jonas had failed to save but would honor by raising a daughter who knew her worth from birth. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. The refuge continued, word spreading through the territories that the Wren cabin was a place where people could find safety. Some stayed days, some stayed months. All were treated with the same respect Mabel had been denied for so many years, and had vowed no one under her roof would lack. And through it all, Jonas and Mabel worked side-by-side partners in every sense, building a life that honored the freedom they'd fought for, and extending that freedom to everyone who needed it. One autumn evening, when Grace was 15 and beautiful in the way of young women who've never doubted their right to exist, when Daniel was 13, and already taller than his father, when Margaret was 11, and asked questions faster than Jonas could answer them, the whole family sat on the expanded porch, watching sunset paint the peaks gold and crimson. "Papa," Grace asked. "Tell us again how you met Mama." It was a story they'd heard dozens of times, but Jonas never tired of telling it. He looked at Mabel and she smiled older. Now her hair shot through with silver, her face lined by weather and laughter, and nodded permission. "Your mother arrived at Fort Bridger on a wagon," Jonas began. "Scared hurt being sold like property. And I had money for a beautiful horse fastest animal in 3 territories. But I looked at your mother and saw something more valuable than any horse. I saw a human being who deserved freedom." "So you bought her contract and tore it up," Daniel said. He'd heard this part before but loved it anyway. "I did. Best $70 I ever spent. And then I brought her here and she taught me that saving someone once isn't enough. You have to give them space to save themselves. She did that, saved herself, became herself, chose this life freely. And then," he reached for Mabel's hand, "she chose me. Greatest mystery of my life is why, but I've learned not to question miracles." "Because you're good," Mabel said simply. "Because you saw me as human when others saw me as burden. Because you gave me dignity when the world said I had none. That's why." "The horse story," little Margaret demanded. "Tell about the horse." "Silas Boone kept that horse," Jonas said. "Beautiful Appaloosa stallion I wanted more than just about anything. But I chose your mother instead. And Silas, well, he sold that horse eventually to some rich man from the East. Got top dollar for it." "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Choosing Mama over the horse?" Jonas looked at his family, his wife who'd become his everything, his children who existed because he'd made one choice in a dusty fort yard years ago, the life they'd built that helped countless others. He looked at the mountains that had witnessed it all, at the cabin that had grown from shelter to home to refuge. "Not once," he said. "Not for a single second. That horse would have served me well for maybe 15 years. Your mother has given me 25 years of purpose and meaning. Our children will carry forward what we've built. The people we've helped will help others in turn. That's worth more than any horse ever born, worth more than gold or land or anything else the world measures value by." "Papa's getting philosophical," Daniel teased. "Papa's getting old," Jonas corrected. "Old and grateful. Those aren't the same thing, but they go together pretty well." As darkness settled and the first stars emerged, the family stayed on the porch talking and laughing and being together. Somewhere down in the settlements, people told stories about the mountain hermit and the woman he'd saved. But up here in the reality of the life they'd built, it was simpler and more complex than stories ever captured. It was about 2 people who'd chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't, about building dignity in a place that tested you constantly, about proving that kindness could survive at altitude, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that the best trades were measured not in profit, but in lives transformed. And far away in a store in Fort Bridger that had passed through several owners since Silas Boone retired there, hung a faded painting of an Appaloosa stallion. Beautiful, fast, valuable. Travelers would sometimes ask about it, and whoever was minding the store that day would tell the legend. About the mountain man who could have bought that horse but chose to free a woman instead. About how that choice rippled outward, changing lives, and building something that lasted long after the horse was forgotten. About how sometimes the worst trades on paper turned out to be the best investments in humanity. The painting hung there for decades, a reminder that what we choose to value defines who we are. That profit and worth aren't synonyms. That $70 spent on freedom could be worth more than any fortune spent on comfort. And in the mountains where the wind still howled and the snow still fell and the creek still ran cold and clear, the Wren family continued their work. Helping travelers, raising children, proving year after year that the choice Jonas made that autumn day in 1858 was the best trade he ever conducted. Not because it was smart, not because it was profitable, but because it was right. And in the end, being right mattered more than being rich. Being kind mattered more than being clever. And choosing human dignity over personal desire was the kind of profit that compounded, forever paying dividends in lives touched, hearts changed, and a legacy that would outlast any fortune. The merchant had wanted to sell the horse to the mountain man, but the mountain man had chosen the girl instead, and that choice made all the difference.